The speaker repeatedly prefers conditions that minimize vulnerability, certainty over uncertainty, strength over dependence, proof over hope, control over emotional surrender, definitive elimination over continuing resistance, homogeneity over competing directions, one civilizational trajectory over plural trajectories, long-term continuity over the collapse of leadership. Even the fascination with extermination can be understood partly through this lens. The psychologically salient feature of complete extermination is not merely death. It is the impossibility of reversal. The enemy cannot return. The predator cannot hunt again. The defeated population cannot rebel. The former claimant cannot exercise a future claim. Something uncertain has become certain. Something potentially resistant has become incapable of resistance. That is why it is definitive may be more psychologically revealing than the violent imagery surrounding it. The speaker seems attracted to closed causal systems. Death is conceptualized primarily as termination of agency. The rhetoric surrounding death is unusually impersonal. Death is repeatedly described through what it prevents. No resistance, no future hunting, no competing claim, no reproduction, no escape, no opposition. The person who dies is therefore often represented less as a subjective consciousness than as a future causal agent whose future actions have been reduced to zero. That is an extremely abstract treatment of mortality. The phrase mathematical equation captures the cognitive style particularly well. Death converts contingency into certainty. This does not establish enjoyment of death. There is surprisingly little evidence of pleasure in suffering itself. That distinction should be maintained. A sadistic speaker would ordinarily make suffering, humiliation, fear, or pain intrinsically rewarding. Here, the repeated fascination is instead with definitiveness. The speaker seems substantially more interested in what can never happen afterward than how much did the victim suffer. That does not make the rhetoric benign. In some respects, it makes it more severe, because enormous destruction can be discussed without emotional engagement with the experience of those being destroyed. But psychologically, it is different from sadism. The most plausible terms are instrumentalization, abstraction, and finality seeking, rather than pleasure in cruelty. The extermination passages represent the most dangerous logic in the corpus. The strongest severe interpretation has to take these statements seriously. The passage about defeating an enemy, not merely through military victory, but through killing descendants, preventing reproduction, preventing escape, disturbing graves, and finding every last one, is unmistakably exterminatory rhetoric. The appendix substantially changes what can reasonably be inferred about intention. It tells us this was deliberately constructed to isolate the proposition that completely eliminating a population eliminates that population's subsequent capacity to resist. That context sharply reduces the evidentiary value of the passage as evidence of an operational desire to commit extermination. It does not, however, erase what the rhetoric reveals conceptually. The speaker can mentally represent total extermination as a legitimate analytical variable. Moreover, the rhetoric is capable of temporarily suppressing nearly every competing consideration, ecology, happiness, morality, prosperity, future civilization, in order to examine extermination exclusively through causal effectiveness. That indicates an unusually high capacity for moral compartmentalization. The pattern is, open quote, strip away the emotional variables, close quote, open quote, strip away conventional moral judgment, close quote, open quote, define the desired causal result, close quote, open quote, ask what action guarantees the result, close quote. This is powerful analytical reasoning when applied to engineering or systems problems. Applied to human beings, it creates obvious dangers because the abstraction can make human subjects disappear inside the model. The speaker appears partially aware of that danger. The recovered statement, models reduce people to numbers. Ethics puts the people back in, almost sounds like recognition of the failure mode inherent in the speaker's own thinking. That self-awareness is significant. Morality is demoted but not abolished. The speaker is not a clean mo-nihilist, would have difficulty coherently asserting it is wrong to allow people to live in pain and suffering. It is wrong to allow people to live in squalor, or condemning gratuitous harm to an animal, or distinguishing kingship from tyranny, or saying ethics restores people who have disappeared inside models. The rhetoric therefore contains moral propositions. What it rejects is apparently not morality itself, but morality as the first or dominant analytical language. Morality distracts, suggests that the speaker believes moral reactions can prevent accurate description of causal relationships. This creates a hierarchy. First, understand what power can actually do, then perhaps ask whether it should be done. That order is psychologically characteristic of the corpus. The danger is that the second step can disappear. Once effectiveness becomes intellectually compelling, moral judgment can become an irritating external constraint rather than an integrated component of reasoning. But the corpus never completely eliminates morality. It oscillates between moral distancing and moral re-entry. The mercy argument reveals paternalistic consequentialism. The mercy section is especially revealing. It is wrong to allow people to live in pain and suffering. It is merciful to take them away from all of this. It is merciful to end them. This reasoning begins with compassion and reaches annihilation. That makes it psychologically different from hatred. The speaker can apparently reach an extremely destructive conclusion through an argument whose emotional premise is the reduction of suffering. The severe interpretation is annihilatory paternalism. The decision-maker determines that another person's life is sufficiently undesirable that eliminating the person becomes an act of mercy. The moral danger is obvious. The person's suffering disappears from the decision about whether his or her life remains valuable. The more charitable interpretation is philosophical boundary testing. The speaker is exploring whether reducing suffering can logically be taken so far that it contradicts ordinary intuitions about mercy. The corpus alone cannot establish which interpretation dominates outside rhetoric. But the pattern illustrates something broader. The speaker is willing to follow principles beyond conventional stopping points. That tendency appears repeatedly. If conquest is the objective, why stop at 80%? If evolution is the objective, why exempt the current generation? If power determines outcomes, why pretend reasons compel power? If eliminating an adversary prevents opposition, why stop at partial defeat? If agency can continually be expanded, why stop asking, could I? At ordinary occupations rather than, could one be God? The mind repeatedly presses premises toward their terminal limit. That may be one of its most distinctive cognitive habits. The terminal goal is transformation, not happiness. Saving the world is explicitly separated from saving the people. This may be the single clearest statement of the speaker's teleology. The object of loyalty is not necessarily the currently existing population. It is something larger and more abstract. The world, the species, civilization, the future, perhaps the continuity of directed development itself. That helps explain why the rhetoric can accept sacrifice on enormous scales without becoming straightforwardly egoistic. All humans are worthy of sacrifice is followed by the explicit inclusion of the speaker. That means the speaker's hierarchy does not simply place the self at the top,